Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Hannibal Part 18, Battle of Cumae by HistoryMarche. Last time we saw the expansion of the Second Punic War into several new theaters of conflict. I'm excited to see how these new theaters change the course of the war and how they affect Hannibal, sort of our protagonist who we've been following. I'm sure we'll get to see some of that in this episode. Now, if you guys enjoy this one, I would appreciate it if you would check out my Patreon. It is linked down below, and it will give you access to exclusive and regular reaction content. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction. Alright, Part 18, Battle of Cumae. Let's get into it. Ooh, a new map.
By spring of 215,
same map.
Carthaginian forces under Mago Barca intended to reinforce the war in Italy, and Hasdrubal the Bald intended to bolster the revolt against Rome in Sardinia.
And like I said in the intro, we can see how the Second Punic War is expanding. Frankly, for most of this series, we have been almost exclusively focused on the Italian peninsula and Hispania, and out of those two, far more attention has been given to Italy itself. But now, we see, this map is far more complicated. We see some other states coming into play, sort of the geopolitical relationships of the Mediterranean world. We also see conflict arising in, for example, Sardinia and Sicily, two very important islands in the Mediterranean that were, frankly, very important parts of the First Punic War. And all these new things emerging, new allies, new enemies, new theaters of conflict, all of these are going to make the war more complex and really change the course of it. It's no longer just Hannibal making his way and winning all these victories on Italy. It's a whole lot more broad than that.
Were nearly ready. But before either army could make way, the Senate learned of the defeat at Hibera. Tensions rose on how to respond to the Scipio brothers.
And we've seen that the Carthaginian Senate has already been a bit split on what to do. One faction wants to send all the support possible to Hannibal so he can basically win this war. Another faction is a little more concerned about their economic interests, their land in North Africa, their mines in Hispania, and they're a lot more cautious or downright opposed to sending more support to Hannibal. Now, Hasdrubal was supposed to march with his army through to Italy, as Hannibal had done, meet up, and then they would have been an unstoppable force, but Hasdrubal has been dealt a pretty severe blow by the Romans, severe in that it prevents him from marching to Hannibal's aid, and that could really change how this war is going.
This exposed the divide between the Barcid faction in favor of the war in Italy, the so-called anti-war faction led by Hanno II, which opposed Hannibal's war of conquest. Nevertheless, the Sardinian expedition was to sail as planned once all troops and provisions were gathered. But Mago was ordered not to depart for Italy until an agreement for the situation in Iberia was reached.
Damn.
The cunning Hanno II and his allies succeeded in delaying yet again, leaving Hannibal on his own in Italy.
And they've been real good at that. We've seen that before, especially Hanno himself has been very skilled at delaying temporarily and then permanently aid in manpower that is supposed to be sent to Hannibal. And yes, Hannibal has been doing fantastic on his own. He's been winning these impressive victories, but in order to truly establish himself and accomplish the kind of conquest he is now aiming for, he will need to be resupplied, and he will need more men. The Senate, well, at least half the Senate knows this. Hanno and his faction are still standing in the way. I suppose it's, it's a different perspective. They know it too, but they sort of see things differently.
For at least another year. This video is sponsored by World of Tanks.
Another
the
year.
Legendary free-to-play online
Another year? This war's only been a couple of years. Another year is a massive amount of time. So you guys know the deal. Please go and check out this video from HistoryMarche. I will have it linked in the description down below. go and give them a like, subscribe to their channel, check out their sponsor, show them support for making these fantastic videos.
As pleasing as it was for the Roman Senate to learn about the victory at Habira, their attention was fully directed towards the upcoming campaign on the home front in Italy.
Right. And so, what has happened is that, of course, Rome was dealt a devastating blow by Hannibal at Cumae, and since then it's sort of been in recovery mode, and it has basically adopted the Fabian strategy, sort of be very cautious about engaging Hannibal directly, shadow him, surround him, get into this war of attrition. They're using the strategy that good old Fabius Maximus had tried to use before, and the Senate wasn't very happy. Now they've come crawling back. The question is, will they keep that up, or will they go for a different angle? Maybe once they've recovered from Cumae a little bit, and they do seem to be recovering over time, though Rome is still in a precarious position.
The situation in Bruttium continued to worsen.
Right.
After an 8-month siege, Petelia fell to the Carthaginians. The city suffered brutal punishment for their resistance. Hanno the Elder then swiftly advanced onto Consentia without resting his troops, fully realizing the importance of breaking the Petelia-Consentia axis as the two most important pro-Roman cities in Bruttium.
Oh, okay. There's a bit of local politics. I couldn't have told you that, but HistoryMarche is doing a good job. They're giving us a look into the local politics of these different regions of Rome. And we've talked about this before. Oftentimes when we think about the Roman Republic or the Roman Empire, we think about Italy being the center of this empire. The strong, united Roman Italy. And there is some truth to that, especially later on, but even at this point, there's still a lot of people who are not super enthused about the Roman Empire throughout the Italian peninsula. It's a lot more broken up than you might imagine. And so getting a look at these sort of granular local political situations has been really fascinating for me.
The news of the horrors that took place in Petelia preceded the Carthaginian army. In Consentia, the pro-Roman faction wanted to prepare for a siege. But still without a significant victory in Italy, there was little support for the Roman cause among the populace. Fearing they would suffer the same fate as Petelia, the people of Consentia decided to surrender.
Fair. That's fair.
With the gates to Bruttium now open, a new wave of support came for the Carthaginians. Towns from the hills mobilized their own militia army to exact revenge on Croton.
And as we've said, or as I've said before, a lot of this is really about momentum, and it shows you just how much momentum the Carthaginians had, that these towns are by their own will, or maybe not by their own will, under some coercion, but they are going over to the Carthaginian side. What that means is that these people who, remember, they're looking out for their city, they're looking out for themselves. This means that now they think Carthage, in the immediate term, is the best bet. They sort of have to side with Carthage, or they think it's best for themselves or their city to side with Carthage. Shows you the sort of power Carthage is now gathering in southern Italy.
Another pro-Roman city the natives deemed treacherous for siding with the enemy. The army of Hanno the Elder soon reached Locri, which surrendered without a fight. Other cities quickly followed suit.
And now we're getting pretty close to the southern tip of the peninsula, close to Sicily, which is also going through its own civil conflict. I guess you could call it maybe even a bit of a civil war, though not quite, but we do have, throughout the Italian peninsula and in Sicily in particular, a couple of different factions fighting amongst each other, making alliances, deciding who to side with. It is more complicated than just Carthage on one side, the Romans on one side. You've got Greeks involved, you've got other people groups involved, you have some Romans who are siding with the Carthaginians, so, it is a complicated picture.
With the large port of Locri now in Carthaginian hands, Hanno the Elder sent a message to Carthage that a suitable safe haven for Carthaginian ships had been secured, urging the Senate to send Mago with the requested troops, supplies, and funds.
And by the way, throughout the conflict, this is one of the things that Carthage has really been waiting for. We've seen in the past, they have either not tried or struggled to deliver manpower and supplies to Hannibal, because Carthage did not have a firm control over, these important coastal cities, these important coastal depots. But now Carthage does. I mean, look at the map we're being shown right now. Carthage has pretty strong control over a lot of coastal areas in southern Italy now. That gives the Carthaginian Senate much more of an opportunity to actually send supplies and troops to Italy.
Soon as possible. But Hanno II and his wealthy allies had other plans. For 3 months now, Mago Barca had been trying to get approval from the Senate to set sail with his army.
He's been trying his best.
The pro-Barcid faction argued that if Hannibal defeated Rome in Italy, the war would be won. But, fearing the growing influence of the Barcid family, Hanno II rallied behind the wealthy aristocracy, who above all else did not want to see Hannibal become the most powerful man in Carthage.
Fascinating. So now we're seeing politics, and we've seen it before, really getting in the way of the war effort. Now, the claim, if Hannibal defeats Rome and Italy, then we win the war. Is that true? Maybe not entirely. I think it would have to be an extremely complete victory for Rome to truly surrender. The Rome that we know always keeps fighting. But I do think, it would be wise to send Hannibal more men and supplies, because, yeah, every victory in Italy is a big deal. He is wearing down the Republic. He is wearing down the Roman people, though very, very slowly. But, we see these sort of political disagreements getting in the way of things, and, to be fair, there absolutely is something to be feared from such a popular general as Hannibal. I mean, think about another character who, at this point, is still pretty far in the future. Think about someone like Julius Caesar. Or there's a lot of examples of these powerful generals who become a little too independent, a little too autonomous. They start ignoring directives from their government, and then, well, they're marching back on the capital city. That's the most extreme case, a la Caesar, but, maybe they're just setting up their own base of power. And so, yeah, if you are one of these elites, Hannibal is probably someone you should be worried about, but do you let that get in the way of the war effort? Or do you have other concerns to worry about? Like I mentioned, a lot of these guys on Hanno's side are worried about their possessions in Hispania. They've got a bunch of wealthy silver mines out there. They don't want to send all their troops to Italy. What if their mines get overrun? They've got that to worry about. So, just this really complex political picture at the moment.
Once the war was over, in their minds, as the man who conquered Rome, there would be no one to stop Hannibal from becoming a de facto emperor. Conveniently, their stance was that reinforcements should not go to the Barcid brother that was winning, but to the Barcid brother that was losing.
Right to Hispania! Ain't that convenient?
Mago Barca would not be sailing for the port of Locri in Italy. He was to take his army of 12,000 experienced African infantry and 6,000 Numidian cavalry to Iberia.
And to be fair, there is an argument to be made for sending Mago to Hispania, and that argument is, well, Hasdrubal has already been defeated by these damn Scipio brothers. Rome is gaining ground in Hispania. We need to shore up our territory. We need to defeat these Scipio brothers, and if we can make that happen, perhaps by reinforcing Hasdrubal, then maybe he can march to Italy, resupply, meet up with Hannibal, and then they can win all these impressive victories in the Italian peninsula. Now, I'm willing to bet you that Hanno and his faction were more worried about, 1, not sending those troops to Hannibal, and 2, protecting their own interests. They probably weren't that concerned about the actual legitimate argument, but there is a legitimate argument to be made.
Stripping Hannibal of these much-needed reinforcements, This was the ripple effect of the defeat at Hibera. The victory of the Scipio brothers over Hasdrubal unintentionally gave political ammunition to Hanno II and his anti-Barkid faction, and they used it to great effect. For a third year in a row now, they've successfully prevented any significant reinforcements from being sent to Hannibal. Instead of the army, supplies, and funds he was promised, Hannibal would be getting only 4,000 Numidian cavalry and 40 elephants from the Senate.
Man, that is tough. And Hannibal has this in common with a lot of great generals, which is, wherever Hannibal is, Carthage finds success. But wherever Hannibal isn't, Carthage seems to be having a much harder time. He had this in common with, for example, Napoleon, though Napoleon, after his early career, would go on to become Emperor of France, and so he would have more control over the situation, though even then, he still faced this issue of he couldn't be everywhere at once. Hannibal has this to an even higher degree. Like Napoleon earlier in his career, Hannibal is, loyal to his government, at least somewhat. He relies on them to keep him afloat, and so, first off, Hannibal isn't in Hispania, and the Carthaginians are losing in Hispania. Hannibal also isn't back in the Carthaginian Senate, and he's currently losing the political battle back in the Senate. So it's a tricky situation, and, it's easy to feel frustrated, I think, on Hannibal's behalf. Like, man, he's doing so well, but he can't, get things to turn his way in these other aspects of the war outside of Italy.
Ironically, the other army of 12,000 infantry and 1,500 cavalry, recruited under Hasdrubal the Bald, would make way, as planned, to reinforce the revolt against Rome in Sardinia. But the Romans had troubles of their own. The situation in Sicily remained bleak.
Yeah.
Appius Claudius began operations to recover parts of the island. Undermanned and undersupplied, he avoided attacking the more consolidated Syracusans and instead began the grueling task of quelling the rebellion of the Greek cities in the north of the island, an uncertain campaign that would drag on for a year. Despite the situation in Sicily, the primary objective for the year 215 was to contain Hannibal. All Roman resources went towards supplying the three massive armies in Campania. Yet,
it is sort of a Roman thing to do, which is, they didn't embrace the Fabian strategy in the past. Now that they have, they're basically doing the Fabian strategy on steroids. They've got these three massive juiced up armies that they're sending so many men and supplies to, and they're saying, all right, do the Fabian strategy with that, why don't you? But, sort of the essential goal is still the same. They're talking about containing Hannibal. Contain Hannibal, don't let him do too much damage, engage in this battle of attrition, sort of the goals of the Fabian strategy, more or less, and avoid major pitched battles, if possible. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes it has to happen, but if possible, try to, stay a step back from Hannibal.
The Roman generals would not challenge the Carthaginian in open battle.
Smart.
Caution was the order of the day.
Yeah.
Moreover, a great cause for concern were rumors that Capua was pressuring Cumae to switch sides. To reassert Roman authority, Gracchus crossed the Volturnus River. Once celebrated as one of the most powerful cities in Italy, Cumae held a hillside position on the edge of the most fertile part of the Campanian plain, and its port still secured influence overseas.
All right.
And as it turned out, the rumors were true. The Capuans wanted to use a nearby festival to invite Cumae's officials for talks. If the negotiations didn't go as planned, their intention was to storm the city while most of the garrison was away enjoying the festivities.
So sneaky.
Although unaware of what the Capuans were planning, Gracchus was suspicious enough to scout the surrounding area.
You know, that's the kind of trick you can only pull on your neighbor. That results from you knowing about their customs, their festivals. Gracchus is like, I don't quite know what's going on here, but Cumae and Capua, these neighbors, they can pull these sort of tricks on each other.
And make camp close to Cumae. He ordered the inhabitants to stay behind the walls and stockpile provisions. Concerned about Hannibal's trickery, the Roman consul did not want to risk losing the important city to the enemy.
All right.
The hidden Capuan camp was soon discovered. Gracchus launched a surprise attack at midnight the same day. With a substantial portion of the Capuan contingent attending the festival in the hope that the Cumaeans would show up, the weakly defended camp was overrun. Over 2,000 Capuans were killed, including their commander.
God.
For Gracchus, this concentration of Capuan forces meant only one thing. It wouldn't be long.
I mean, I know we've seen much bigger numbers than that, but for such a small-scale conflict on the city level, I imagine that was a fairly devastating loss to the city.
Long before the Carthaginian army appeared. Indeed, Hannibal, having known about the conspiracy beforehand, was already on his way.
Of course.
Fabius's scouts discovered Hannibal's movement. He could have put pressure on the Carthaginian army on its northern flank, albeit by committing to a dangerous crossing of the Volturnus while the enemy was nearby. Instead, Fabius refused to leave his fortified position north of the river.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really Fabius's style. We've seen that he is the very image of caution. I mean, that's what this whole strategy revolves around, non-engagement and caution. I mean, that's a bit of a misnomer. It's not entirely centered around non-engagement. You do engage with the enemy, skirmishes, you hit them when they're vulnerable, but largely you want to avoid engagements, and Fabius in particular, he certainly does. We saw Marcellus, you know, when he won his victory a couple episodes ago, he was also basically practicing the same strategy, but he was a little more aggressive, erred a little less on the side of caution. So, you know, if we have a spectrum, at this point Rome is sort of on the same page. We're on the cautious side of things. We are doing this Fabian strategy, but Fabius is sort of all the way to one end where he's extra cautious.
Gracchus was on his own.
Okay.
Sensing danger, he did not wait for his own scout reports, but swiftly withdrew behind the walls of Cumae.
It's probably
his
smart.
Instincts were right. Soon after...
I mean, I think for him the options were fight, but terrible idea. You do not want to fight Hannibal. Run away, or, you know, hide behind the walls of the city. I think he probably made a smart choice there.
A tower lookout spotted Hannibal's standard on the horizon. With his army of 40,000, Hannibal arrived before the gates of Cumae sometime in June 215. He deployed at some distance and challenged the Romans to fight him.
All right.
The 25,000-strong Roman army was outnumbered, but the sloped terrain in front of the city favored the defenders. The Carthaginians would have to slog their way up to attack a Roman army deployed in front of the walls. But the troops under Gracchus's command were a mix of allies and volunteer slaves. The Roman consul constantly drilled his men to form a proper fighting force, but he still deemed them unfit to fight against Hannibal's veteran mercenaries in open battle.
Yeah, I mean, you're in a pretty dangerous spot. You are pretty significantly outnumbered by Hannibal. As I said, I just referenced Marcellus's sort of minor victory. He found himself in a somewhat similar situation. Marcellus handled it pretty well. Like I said, you know, he sort of did play it cautiously, but was aggressive when the time came to strike. Now we get to see how Gracchus plays this situation, though, I mean, it's worth remembering that we have Fabius and Marcellus, you know, they're still stationed in the field, so I don't know if either of them are going to try and step in and help by engaging Hannibal or warding him off or threatening his flank or whatever.
the Romans would stay behind the walls of Cumae. Meanwhile, the construction that had been going on in the Carthaginian battle line turned out not to be the setting of camps, but the constructing of towers. This time, Hannibal would force the issue.
They're going for it.
The Romans scrambled to construct their own tower. Once ready,
come on, put that famous Roman engineering to the test.
Carthaginian formation arrayed behind the tower and advanced towards the wall.
Uh-oh.
Gracchus directed his men to place the Roman tower to counter the focus point.
It's almost funny now, since Cumae, the roles, I think I've said this before, they've sort of flipped a little bit. Not entirely, but, you know, we're used to seeing the aggressive Roman soldiers charging straight at Hannibal, who draws them in and surprises them. Now, the situation we have, it's not even that it's flipped, it's just a different situation. We have the Romans behaving cautiously, hiding behind walls, and it's Hannibal who has to force the issue. He's not the one drawing the Romans in, he's charging straight forward. Now he's the one, you know, aggressively going in to get into these, you know, face-to-face battles with the Romans, who are now trying to avoid them. And, you know, it really shows you how the dynamics have shifted, basically, since Cumae.
Of Hannibal's attack. A rain of projectiles was exchanged, and parts of the two towers kept catching fire, which the soldiers frantically extinguished. Finally, the Carthaginian tower reached the wall. Despite being outnumbered at the top, Hannibal's experienced troops remained steadfast, pushing their way onto the wall. The fighting was brutal, but the Roman discipline held until both sides were exhausted. As the Carthaginians withdrew the tower, the less experienced Roman soldiers wanted to take the fight to the enemy.
This has been the Roman mistake so many times before. You know, they see a little bit of success, or even just avoid a loss, and they decide, all right, let's charge forward, let's get in there. And then they run straight forward, headfirst into a trap, or just headfirst into their own deaths. So this mistake has been made many times before. Let's see if Gracchus can keep his men under control.
This is what Hannibal was hoping for.
Yep, as always.
A Roman victory will motivate them to accept a battle in the open.
Yep.
But Gracchus knew better.
Hey, there we go.
Seeing Hannibal arraying new formations at various points along the wall, and more construction possibly going on behind enemy lines, he assumed that a renewed attack was coming. Having barely held the Carthaginians at bay during the first assault, the Roman consul feared that his troops might not be able to prevent Hannibal from storming the city, and he ordered the men to withdraw behind the walls of the citadel.
Okay.
But Hannibal...
Maybe a little preemptive. You know, I mean, that's sort of your line of last resort. You don't want to withdraw there instantly, but you can see why Gracchus is concerned.
Hannibal was just as unwilling to risk his irreplaceable troops in a chaotic battle among the streets and houses of Cumae. He too withdrew and marched back to his camp at Mount Tifata.
Wow. Yeah, the dynamics have really changed, you know? And really changed since Cumae. And, I mean, basically through episode, like, 13. So, the majority of the series, we were seeing the same pattern play out. The Romans would be far too aggressive, far too overconfident, especially if they saw some minor success. They would charge straight forward, Hannibal would lead them into a trap, then totally crush them. But it's a lot more complex now. We have both sides playing cautiously. Hannibal, as always, is playing cautiously, but he now has to be a little more aggressive, though he's still intelligent with what he does. The Romans, or at least these Romans, have finally learned their lesson. Marcellus, Fabius, and Gracchus, at least for now. I don't know how they're going to perform in the future, but from what we're seeing here, they know that they have to be cautious. They can't afford to be too aggressive. They need to restrain their men. You know, they can't go charging in head first. And so now these battles are sort of a lot more strategic in nature. There's a lot less of just, all right, men, charge in head first and fight each other. It's like, all right, we need to pull back. We can't afford to fight. Also, both sides are Hannibal's always been concerned, but now the Romans are equally concerned about losing all of these men they've mobilized because they've already lost so many, and they actually are, they haven't hit that point, but they're getting closer to a point where they're going to start struggling to mobilize more people. And so just the increased caution and sort of the strategic moves from both sides is really fascinating and just a big change from what we saw earlier in the series.
But while the attack on Cumae went on, Fabius finally broke camp
and
crossed the river.
There he is.
However, he did not attempt to flank Hannibal and surround his position from the rear. Instead, he made his way towards Suessula, where he joined forces with Marcellus.
All right. I think I'm falling into the same trap that the Romans have time and time again, because when Fabius doesn't flank Hannibal, I think to myself, well, why not? Such a good opportunity. I mean, you don't have to be too aggressive, just, maybe pull in a little bit, but that's the mistake that the Romans made time and time again, so I think Fabius probably knows what he's doing more than I do. He's the one who's seen success so far. He's the one who knows to avoid a movement like that because it's too risky.
All three Roman armies were now south of the Volturnus. Hannibal was hemmed in. Ironically, his success in persuading the Italic state to join his cause was now contributing to the success of the Fabian strategy. The Carthaginian general could no longer march his smaller army away to another region and lure the Romans into a battle. Now he had allies to protect, chiefly Capua.
Hannibal's now facing an issue that the Romans have been dealing with. Hannibal's no longer so free and loose. I mean, so far, Hannibal's just been marching up and down the Italian peninsula. Really, his maneuverability, how quickly he can move and make decisions has been a big advantage for Hannibal, but now he has territory he has to worry about. He has allies he has to worry about, so as they're saying, he can no longer afford to do that. That is a fairly significant advantage that is sort of falling away from Hannibal.
Despite being outnumbered, he had to fight to preserve the coalition he had created. Rome, meanwhile, continued avoiding a major battle, instead directing their attacks on Hannibal's allies. In July, Marcellus left camp to raid the towns in Samnium. Hannibal now faced a dilemma. With only 40,000 troops, he faced up to 100,000 Romans.
And it's sort of a very un-Roman way of going about it. The lack of, not just charging straight forward, trusting your men and their discipline and bravery to hold the field, and instead acting cautiously, doing these little raids. It seems a little un-Roman in nature, but I would say also something that was quite Roman was adapting to the situation, and that's exactly what they're doing here, and this is absolutely the strategy to go with at the moment, and I mentioned this before. It is super reminiscent, to me at least, of the end of the Napoleonic Wars, when Napoleon was facing a similar situation. He was being hemmed in by the coalition, all these different European armies. They outnumbered him by a lot. They refused to engage him, and so there was nothing he could do. There was nowhere he could go. This is seeming very similar to that. And, it sort of relies on the same principles, lack of engagement, containment, these sort of things. That is the strategy that the coalition would use so many years later to defeat Napoleon, and that's what the Romans are using on Hannibal right now.
He could split his forces to check Marcellus and protect Capua at the same time, but this would leave him at grave risk of being overrun. Or he could concentrate his forces near Capua and leave the Samnite towns to their fate, which would make him appear weak and unable to protect his allies. Something that would quickly lead to the breakup of his Italian coalition.
This is why Hannibal needs those extra men. He's dealing with a different situation. Like we said, he has to be stationed in these positions. He can no longer afford to just march around willy-nilly. That's why he needs more men. So he can garrison these towns and be a little more secure and split his army up. you know, with the amount of manpower he has right now, he can't do a lot of these things, or if he does, it's very risky.
Soon enough, the Samnites sent envoys seeking help from Hannibal. After some deliberation, the Carthaginian broke camp, but he surprised everyone by making way for Nola for a second time.
Oh, wow.
The wily general correctly guessed that neither Fabius nor Gracchus would challenge him in the open, and he thus outmaneuvered the Romans yet again.
Nice.
Hannibal's thinking was sound. Nola held...
And now, you know, like I said, this is how the European coalition defeated Napoleon. Napoleon really couldn't work out a way to fight against this strategy, or at least not enough to win him the conflict. Though Napoleon was also dealing with the overwhelming manpower and resources of the coalition assembled against him. It's not quite that overwhelming in this case. But, you know, if Hannibal knows what's going on, and he does, can he figure out a way to use it to his advantage? I don't know. You know, this whole Fabian strategy's been working pretty well so far, but Hannibal's a pretty brilliant guy.
An important position, being on the main road that cut through Campania. Devastating the region around the city would both satisfy his army and force Marcellus away from Samnium. Moreover, the pro-Carthaginian settlement was still strong in the city, and if it went over to the Carthaginian side, Hannibal's lines of communication in Campania would strengthen and push the Romans towards the sea.
Very smart.
In addition, Hannibal sent word to Hanno the Elder, recalling him back to Campania, just as he was preparing to attack Rhegium. Realizing the danger, Marcellus immediately turned back. The Second Battle of Nola was about to begin.
Okay. I'm excited.
If you've made it this far in the video,
this may be a different game, but Hannibal appears to be just as good as he was at the first game. You know, the terms, the dynamics have shifted a little bit, but Hannibal is still brilliant. Now we have to see how the Romans respond. And we are almost caught up with this series, by the way. The next episode, part 19, we will be fully caught up with this series, and so from that point onwards, of course, the reactions will slow significantly because I'll have to wait for HistoryMarche to upload new episodes in their Hannibal series for me to upload reactions. And I don't know what the schedule is, but these days they seem to only be coming out like every couple of months. So after part 19, we might not be getting another Hannibal part for a while, but you know, we can talk about that when we get to it. This was fantastic. Another great video. I love the complexity of the tactics and the strategy and the politics. All of this stuff is very interesting to me, and I hope it is to you. If you guys enjoyed this one, I'd appreciate it if you would leave a like, subscribe, check out the Patreon. It is linked down below. All that good stuff. Now, I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.